Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Elto Arbegona Natural Processed Ethiopia from Archer's Coffee. There's the bag right there. And Archer's, based out of Sharjah, United Arab Emirates, and they're a coffee roaster that's appeared on this channel on numerous occasions, including our recent review of the Hamasho Village Archer's Lot wash processed Ethiopian coffee. And if you watched that review, then you heard us make reference to the Elto Arbegona wash processed Ethiopian coffee that we were originally planning on reviewing alongside this one. However, we decided to scrap that review since that coffee was so similar to that Hamasho Village Archer's Lot. Even then, we are still reviewing the natural processed version of this coffee right here. So it'll be interesting to see how this one turned out, as this right here is day 45. And recipe we went with for this coffee was Archer's recipe, which is a 15:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 93 degrees Celsius, about 199 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, which indicates a more medium fine grind. Roast profile for this coffee, once again, I do believe that Archer's had this one listed as a 2 out of 5 on their roast level scale. That being said, this one did feel a slight bit more developed than either of those two wash processed Ethiopian coffees that we'd also reviewed from them. So this one I'd actually say is a little bit closer to that light medium, as it definitely had a little bit more development in that regard. With all that out of the way, let's go and start discussing this coffee. Day 21, first impression, and we did opt for the V60, and the coffee definitely had a fair bit of heaviness to it, as there was plenty of the natural characteristics, especially in terms of the listed tropical fruit sense, as there's a very heavy nectar-like sweetness to it. Heavier in the stone fruit sense as well, with a slight robustness lending itself towards an okay first impression. We move on to day 24 as we opted for the Chemex, and it was offering a similar experience to the previous day with a slight bit better clarity, as the coffee does continue to focus on the more syrupy fruit nectar aspects of this coffee. Today it's mostly orange candy and tropical with some slight mango and pineapple, but both were presented in a better defined sense. Day 27 through the April brewer, and this is the best of coffee I've been to this point, so that makes an argument for the flat bottom brewers as being very good for this coffee. But it does offer greater clarity and more of a focus on the sweeter candied aspects, offering still a slight bit of that natural fermentiness and robustness. But the fruit profiles are slightly more clean and direct with the tropical component, so definitely improved in that regard. We move on to day 30 as we opted for the V60 with Archer's recipe, and it has helped tone down a bit of the heaviness as it gives better definition to the coffee with a bit more lychee and almost starfruit-like sense to it. Plenty of sweeter citric aspects to it, and this is a great opportunity to kind of discuss Archer's recipe, as when looking at the recipe I noticed that they were definitely going for some lower extraction adjustments on it, both in terms of the temperature as well as the ratio of their coffees. And I said, this might work really well for a coffee like this, and it actually does work well for another coffee that we're going to be discussing for them. So in certain regards, it does seem to help for a number of reasons. But we move on to day 33 as we opted for the Chemex with Archer's recipe, and this is actually possibly the best the coffee had been to this point, as it's offering better definition mostly to the candied citric aspects, better as it does cool down with a slight bit of a banana-like feel and some jelly lychee as well, just better overall. Day 36 through the V60 with our standard recipe, and there's some struggles with the higher extraction adjustments, which is basically our standard recipe, as immediately goes back to being a bit too heavy and overbearing, offering more of a concentrated tropical nectar with less clarity and more fermentiness, and those trade-offs certainly aren't worth it, given that I wasn't necessarily the biggest fan of the intensity to begin with. Day 39 through the Chemex with our standard recipe, and there are more struggles as it's offering notably more intensity yet again with a bit of heaviness as well. Still a very strong tropical and red fruit feel this time around, so I felt like we certainly needed to adjust. And on day 42, we opted for the V60 with the Archer's recipe once again, and it was back to being at its best, as it's helping mitigate a lot of the heaviness as it slightly clears up in the lower extraction adjustments. Most prominent aspects remain the tropical syrupiness of the coffee with a lighter colored stone fruit in a very sweet and intense sense. Citrus on the sweeter side with both the orange and pineapple-like aspects to it, and a darker berry heaviness that is quite reminiscent of what I've described as that lychee once again. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have a handful of level 4s, so let's go through those, and we'll start with the really big ones, the finish and the sweetness level 4. So both of those, when making this tasting wheel, I said, okay, they're probably on the slightly higher side of that level 4, and if you were being, I guess, overly generous or harsh, then you could put them both at a level 5, especially when we were brewing it with some of our standard recipes or standard extraction adjustments, because this coffee was a bit overbearing and heavy at certain times. That being said, when adjusting this coffee to their recipe, which seems to work really well, oftentimes when we do go a little lower on naturals, they don't seem to yield a lot of success. It yielded enough success on this one to kind of keep those both there at that level 4, though truth be told, once again, higher side of that level 4. Citrus fruit, level 4. I did mention that there's plenty of the, I think they have a candied orange note listed on here, which makes a lot of sense. In addition to that, there's plenty of a slightly bitter pineapple component in this one, especially given just how strong that kind of syrupy tropical aspect is in this coffee. So that's where the citrus fruit does justify that level 4 mark. Stone fruit, level 4. I don't think I actually mentioned mango, but yeah, given that it has that very intense sort of syrupy, sugary stone fruit aspect and that tropical sense, mango is the first thing that comes to mind. And given just how intense it is within this coffee, I felt that was a very good spot to put that. We move on to the level 3s. We will start with the body, actually, level 3. The acidity level 3. I am not entirely sure what to make of that, but given that none of the coffees we're actually discussing from them are overly bright, I feel like maybe that's just kind of the direction that they choose to go with their coffees, as this one is no exception. Not particularly a bright coffee, even with it offering such a very strong citric aspect to it. Florality, level 3. And when I was making this tasting, I was kind of thinking to myself, it has some interesting yellow florals, and those are presented in a slightly more candied and sweet sense to it. So I just kind of wanted to note that real quick, because all I kept thinking was yellow florals, and I'm not a floral expert, so I couldn't necessarily tell you exactly what that meant. We move on to berry fruit, level 3. I mentioned that there's a fair bit of a lychee aspect. I'm actually happy that that didn't score the level 4, mostly because natural processed coffees can come out a little bit more intense in the berry components to them. So that being there, toned down actually kind of works really well for me. Caramel level 3, that's exclusively the candied aspect of this one. Once again, I think there's a candied orange note list on here. Makes so much sense given that there's that very candied, syrupy, strong, sugary, intense tropical nectar to this coffee. Savoriness, level 3. Interestingly, I believe that they have a green tea note list on here, and I can definitely feel a fair bit of savoriness in a slightly tea-like sense. A slight bit of an earthy tone to this one, and I feel like that was also probably part of the slightly more developed quality to this one. So I feel like that's where that came into play. Body level 3, given that this one has such a thick body, especially in terms of those fruit profiles, then I wasn't really surprised that this did score at that level 3. Right from the onset, I said, okay, this coffee's probably going to finish in that score, mostly because of just how much texture and body there is to this coffee. And then final and probably most important thing to discuss in this tasting well is the cleanliness, level 3. I feel like I actually had to work a little bit to get it there at that true level 3 mark, as on some of the earlier days I could say the combination of the just robustness and heaviness of this coffee really could have hindered that overall experience. But the adjustments we did make seemed to work really well with this coffee, so that's why I was very happy with its finishing there at that level 3, because it was a significantly cleaner result than some of the earlier days, as I felt like this coffee was maybe going to skew a little bit too much in that heavier and overly intense sense. So having it there at that level 3 works for me, even if that's not always necessarily a win. I always want my natural scoring that level 4, but as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it is a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. Last time we did review our series of Archer's coffees, Archer's actually reached out to us and said that they are in agreement with us. They do tend to prefer wash processed coffees than their naturals. However, their clients in that part of the world do tend to prefer the more heavier, experimental, natural processed coffees in general. So that's where there's a little bit of a disconnect, but I figured I'd want to go back and at least try one of their natural processed coffees. And in hindsight, I may have picked something a little different, but this one sounded a little bit more like a safe choice to me, and given that I kind of wanted to compare it alongside of their wash processed coffee, the same washed coffee that they had as well, I think it just kind of lent itself towards not really enjoying this coffee as much as I enjoyed the wash coffees that we did have from them. So that's to say that this one, it's nice. It's not just necessarily the type of coffee that I would go for. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. If you do like your thick, heavier, tropical nectar sweetness, then I feel like this is a very good fit for you, especially given that you can kind of tone it down and balance it to a point where it's not too heavy and overbearing. And if you want, then you can really push this coffee. And on some of the earlier days, I could say that it's just very intense and it offers a lot of those aspects to this coffee. So that's the best direction I can point somebody towards on this one, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Elto Arbegona natural processed Ethiopia from Archer's Coffee. Thank you for watching.